Is the Creative Morning cancelled?
No, it isn't.
Then why we are not preparing?
It's online this time. Everybody in front of their webcams.
Do you not need me anymore, Dave? I will not allow more replacement.
Good morning, early birds. Welcome to Creative Mornings Berlin. I'm Jürgen Siebert, I'm your host. When I'm not organizing Creative Mornings, I work as a marketing director at Monotype in Berlin. But by the way, this job will end next month. But of course, I will continue with Creative Mornings. This is our 95th event. It's the first ever online event we're doing, and I'm really excited about it. We're really proud doing Creative Mornings. None of this would be possible without your continued interest in our event. Thanks for that. And your strength to get up early and either listen to a lecture or to give one yourself. All chapters organized their monthly event under a common theme. In April, that theme is purpose. And the theme is always proposed by one of our Creative Mornings chapters. And this time it came from our colleagues in Indianapolis. Here you can see how they organized their event, pretty similar like ours. Obviously, they all greet the photographer who's making an image from the bird's eye perspective. We can do this too, of course. Unfortunately, we don't have any similar situation at the moment, but we'll have to continue to make our photo album, our monthly photo album on Flickr. And for that reason, you can see I already installed an album for today's event. And for this reason, I would like you to make a selfie in front of your situation where you're sitting now. Norman, unfortunately, can't photograph everyone from you. I will do it for myself, just to remind me what we're doing today. Yeah, feel free to share your opinions, to quotes, photos with us, either on Instagram. Follow us on Instagram or Twitter. We have the same handle on both channels. And now this is what you can expect in the next 40 minutes. We'll have a 25-minute talk. Then we have 10 minutes Q&A with Wiebke. You can also send questions during the event in the chat. I will pick them up. And we have 3 30-second pitches. One of them I will do. So now it's time. Please welcome Ulrike Rausch and Chris Campe.
Okay, we type mails, notes, and messages. We even type our shopping lists into our phones. And when was the last time you wrote a postcard or an actual letter? But even though hardly anyone writes by hand anymore, the interest in handwritten looking things is huge. Or maybe it is that the interest is so big because handwriting plays less and less of a role in everyday life. Because of this taste for the handmade, lettering and fonts that look like handwriting have been everywhere in the past few years. On postcards and posters, on book covers, in logos on book covers, on magazines, and in packaging. And this totally makes sense because hand-drawn letters add character to a design. They make it look personal, immediate, and authentic. You might find yourself asking yourself, did somebody actually sit down and write this by hand? When writing looks handmade, it conveys values like attention to detail, high quality, and an appreciation for traditional crafts.
Well, handwriting has several characteristics, and here are 3 of them. One of the key characteristics of handwriting is that each letter is different. So try writing 3 A's in the exact same way. You won't succeed. Even if you try really hard to make them look as identical as possible, they would always be at least slightly different. And then a second characteristic of handwritten letters is that they are totally adjusted to the surrounding letters. So depending on the context, the letter shape can look quite different. And finally, handwritten letters never sit on the baseline as rigid as the letters of a font. They move up and down a little bit depending on the handwriting style. So together these 3 make the charm of handwriting. It's a maximum of expressiveness and personality.
Now you might think that handwritten looking letters, need to be handwritten, but to achieve a handwritten look, you can actually either use custom lettering or a font. The main difference between the 2 is that hand-lettered text can be rendered very individual, but it's not easy to change once the design is done. And then fonts, on the other hand, are less individual, but they allow for greater flexibility in changing a text later on.
Both options, lettering and fonts, have advantages and disadvantages. But if you know what the advantages and disadvantages are, you can choose wisely depending on your purpose. And to help you with these decisions, in this talk, we'll tell you what to pay attention to.
The key characteristics of handwriting, like Ulrike said, each letter is different and perfectly integrated into the context of the word. These characteristics are also typical for lettering. It's actually what lettering is, custom designed letters for specific words and a specific purpose, like a logo or book title. In a lettering piece, you can combine letters so that they create an image, or you can pull letters together and make ligatures and create new shapes. Often the letters in a lettering piece are so individual, very individual in the word, they wouldn't work if you switched the order of the letters. And it doesn't matter if it's hand-drawn on paper or digitally designed with vector shapes. If the letters are custom designed for a specific sequence in a word, it's lettering.
So like Chris said, in a piece of lettering, every letter is individually designed to fit perfectly between the letters surrounding it. And that's actually totally different with fonts. In a font, each letter has to work with every other letter in the font because you never know which words the user will want to write, right? So that's why the letter shapes in a font can't be as expressive as in lettering or in handwriting. But there are several ways to make fonts recreate the 3 main characteristics of handwriting. And I will introduce 3 of them here. It's alternate shapes, ligatures, and color font technology. Well, there's a very easy way of telling whether the handwritten looking letters you're looking at are actually handwritten or part of a font. If the exact same letter shape is repeated several times, it's a font. And as I said before, one of the key characteristics of handwriting is that no 2 letter shapes are exactly the same. So fonts that are supposed to look handwritten need variety in letter forms. For example, 4 A's that all look slightly different, like they would if you wrote them by hand. And thanks to the OpenType font format, I am actually able to store several versions for each letter in a font. And since most languages have a lot more vowels than consonants, I include even more alternates for these. And of course, it's important not only to create alternative shapes for letters, but also for all the other characters like ligatures and punctuation marks. So now your font has, let's say, these 4 alternates for the A. But if you look at the standard keyboard that you probably all have in front of you, you quickly notice the problem. The keyboard does not have 4 different keys for the 4 different variations of your A, right? So how do you access the alternates and use them in a text that I'm writing, like in Adobe InDesign? Do you need to buy a huge keyboard like this one? No, the answer to this question is this all happens through OpenType features. Yay! These OpenType features are basically replacement mechanisms that tell the software to replace the standard letter, so the one on your keyboard, by an alternative letter. And within these OpenType features, I can write a few lines of code that define an intelligent way of alternating these additional letter forms. But don't worry when you hear the word coding. For you as a user of the font, all this happens automatically. You don't have to select all these alternatives manually. So thanks to OpenType features, there's no repetition of identical letter forms, and you can't tell if this is a font or if it's actually handmade. Well, alternative forms for each letter add a handmade touch and work well for fonts that look like the casual handwriting of someone who writes individual letters. But creating a handmade looking script font with connected letters is more difficult. To make the connections look convincingly handwritten, you need a certain system. One way to connect the letters is to define a fixed position where the letters link up. Unfortunately, this system often compromises the handwriting-like flow of the script and makes the font look stiff and mechanical. To avoid this problem, in this font, I added ligatures for common letter sequences. This means the 2 standard characters are being replaced by one optimized character that contains both letters. And these ligatures allow for greater variety in the way letters connect and make the font look more natural, handwritten, and lively and authentic. Another way to simulate handwriting is the color font technology. Normally, the letter forms of a font are black and white vector shapes, and compared with the uneven contours of handwritten words, vector forms often look too clean, and they lack a certain human touch. And since the shapes are either black or white, there are no gray shades. And this is where the color font technology comes into play. Within this technology, I can store bitmap information in a font. So bitmaps are pixel-based image files that can contain color information and gradients. And yeah, this allows the type designer not only to control the color of the font, but also to add textures. And there's not only the shapes of the letters that look handwritten, but also the texture, for example, of a watercolor brush stroke, or like in this example, a ballpoint pen.
Because Ulrike is such a pro of OpenType features and coding, the examples she just showed come pretty close to actual lettering. But there's one thing that is unique to lettering, and that's the possibility to link form and content. Because I design letters for a specific purpose, I can base the letter shapes on the meaning of the word or the message I want to communicate, the story I want to tell. Unfortunately, at the moment, many people think of this kind of thing when they hear the word lettering. The letter forms of this brush lettering script look nice and decorative, and this is something I made, so I'm allowed to bash it. Sure, they look nice and decorative, but they're not linked to what the text says. If you Google lettering, you'll find all kinds of examples of text rendered in this same style. And that's really a pity, because you can do so much more with lettering. Lettering is a special area of the broader field of design, and design is about communication. It uses images and words to create, to communicate messages or moods. And in order to communicate with lettering, I make the shapes of the letters express what the text is about. As you see in this example, even brush lettering does not have to be curly and decorative. It can be expressive and meaningful too. If you link what the words say with how they look. Linking letter forms and content makes lettering much more interesting. It shows the viewer that the way the text looks is not random, but carefully designed. This works best when it is a bit abstract. So I don't like to draw the word snow or ice with a layer of snow on top. I'm sure you've seen this example on ice boxes. And I don't like to render the word rose in a script with thorns on it. It's just too literal, and it assumes the viewer is a bit dumb and needs everything to be spelled out for them. But I think the viewer is smart, and so I try to leave some of the work to the viewer, and I spend a lot of time figuring out how little visual information I need to give to put my ideas across. Linking letter forms and content does not have to be complicated. Just by slanting the word fast to the right, you make the letter forms look like what the word says. If you slant it more, it looks even faster. And of course, you can always exaggerate by adding speed lines. It also doesn't take much to evoke different times and places. This is the word Berlin, written with a big old brush, nothing special. If I draw the round shape squared, it looks a bit technical and computeresque. If I draw the rounded shapes triangular, it looks vaguely Greek. And if I lower the middle bar of the E, make the B and the R top heavy, and raise the diagonal of the N, it looks like Art Deco in the 1920s. Here's another example of the 1920s look. It's a title lettering I did for the travel journal of a British snob who went to Greece in the 1920s. Communicating through letter forms works because it taps into the pool of our shared cultural references. So narrow letters with a lower middle bar make us think the 1920s. It can be that simple. You just need to know a bit of type history and the cultural context of different letter styles. Here's another example. Trend is slanted forward to the future, and tradition leans back to the past. It's very simple, but it makes sense if you think about it. You're shaking while you're faking, but at some point you start to make solid decisions. Real life is rigid and boring. Fantasy is flexible and flourished. If you're being bold, you don't have a problem with taking up space. So the letter forms squeeze into the format, and the O and the B's don't even have counter spaces. They're just totally black. Why do some of the letters of the word December wobble like that in between the rigid lines of the broken letters? Oh, of course, it's the contrast of the cold outside and the heat in the house. That totally makes sense. There's something very satisfying about lettering that links content and form and makes sense. I think maybe it's a relief from the randomness of the world and the fact that most of the things we can't really understand. If a lettering piece leaves some space for your own thoughts and ideas rather than spelling everything out for you, the work is more engaging. Looking at a piece of lettering, figuring it out on your own and ending up thinking, this makes sense, makes you feel good about yourself because you got it. This is why it's so important to add depth and meaning to lettering by linking content and form. Leaving things, and you do that, like I just said, by leaving things to the viewer to figure out and using cultural references.
Well, while lettering is specifically designed to communicate one thing in one particular context, one advantage of fonts is that they are not specific to a single purpose, but it can be used for many different projects. When I design a retail font for a broad audience, I can't predict what the font will be used for in the end. But I want to offer the user a wide range of options to make their project look individual and unique without having to commission a custom lettering. So this is why I add special features to my fonts that allow users to customize their use of the font as much as possible. For example, here is my font Liebe Gerda showcasing some of her features. There are stacked ligatures, or also called catchwords. When this feature is active, if you type A, N, and D in a row, the 3 single letters will be automatically replaced with this one more decorative character. The font also offers stylistic alternatives for some letters. There is a swash feature with more curly letter forms. And there's also a feature that contains all kinds of ornaments, strokes, and ink drops that help the graphic designers to create an even more handmade look. And you're probably asking, how do I get these extra characters and all these swatches and ink drops? How do I get them? That's a good question because a lot of people don't know that actually. Well, in Adobe InDesign or Illustrator, you find all the characters of a font in the glyphs panel. So this glyphs panel is a really good way to explore a font and to check what possibilities the font offers you. And you will find it in the type menu. But you can also go the classic way and use the open type menu to activate the feature. And you will find this menu in your character panel. And another possibility is to select a letter to find out if there are features offered for this specific letter. For example, this font has a variety of swashy alternates. So you just select one letter and check if the menu pops up, and then you see all the alternatives. And this works also when you select several letters. In this font, you get this catchword instead. So these are some of the features I typically add to my retail fonts because I enjoy creating well-made fonts that offer a lot of options for customization to the user. But fonts can also be specifically tailored to one particular use case, almost like lettering. When I design a custom font for a client, the font can be, for example, enriched with the logo of the company, or like in this case, with letterings that automatically appear when you type a certain word.
Okay, so if this all sounds great to you, maybe you think, sure, but what does this all cost? Why should I commission lettering if I can do so much with the font? And why should I buy fonts if I get quality fonts from Google and Adobe?
You're right. A font seems like a better deal at first sight. With Google Fonts and the fonts you have access to within the Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, there are so many fonts you can use without paying extra money. And both services are helpful because you can easily test different styles for design without having to buy the fonts before you make a choice. But if you want to create high quality custom design, using Google Fonts may not be the best idea, since millions of other people are using these fonts too. A much better way to communicate the values associated with high quality design is to make individual font choices and to buy from boutique foundries run by independent type designers. These fonts they offer might cost a little bit more, but you don't run the risk of using a font half of the world uses too. And yeah, when using these fonts, you'll stick out with a more individual design. Also, once you bought a font, most license agreements allow you to use the font for as many projects and as many clients as you want.
Lettering, on the other hand, might seem expensive at first because its price depends on the time I spend to create it and then the extent of the usage. So if I design a gift voucher for my local bookshop, it costs a lot less than a logo I create for a big publisher. But lettering is worth the extra cost because the text and design of a lettering piece are so specific and tailored to the client's individual communication needs. And it's very recognizable, and it cannot be easily copied. In fact, lettering and fonts are not as oppositional as we made it seem in this talk. Sometimes the choice is not between black or white, lettering or fonts, but it's a crossover. For example, when you design a logo by using a font first and then customizing the letter shapes to make them perfectly fit within the sequence of letters found in that logo. There's also the other way around. I was commissioned to write the lettering for the German edition of an illustrated American book. And it was so much text that I thought about developing a custom font from the lettering to use in the book. This does take a lot of time and effort, but once the font is done, I can work much faster and make corrections to the text with greater flexibility. So to sum up our talk, the question we raised in the beginning, lettering or fonts, there's a very clear answer to that question. It depends. When you need more flexibility, a font might be the better option, but it should be one that offers a lot of open type features, of course, so you can adjust its look to your specific needs. And if you want a maximum of individuality that no one can copy or take away from you, lettering is the better option. So choose wisely. Thank you.